And time to bring in our guests now. In London, Rashad Ali, resident senior fellow at the Institute for Strategic Dialogue. In Dubai, via Skype, Riyadh Khawaji, founder and general manager of the Institute for Near East and Gulf Military Analysis. And also in London is Matthew Henman, head of the IHS Jane's Terrorism and Insurgency Center. And welcome to all of you. Rashad, I want to start with you, and I want to start with the most recent attacks last night in Saudi Arabia. Why those particular locations?
Well, I think there's three very different attacks. The first one, which took place in Jeddah, was, I think, quite symbolic, given that it was the American consulate in Jeddah. The second, obviously, in Qutaif, is of particular a Shia dense population as well, so there's an element of the sectarianism there. And the third in Medina, well, it's very difficult for people to comprehend this. But essentially, it's striking in the heart of Saudi Arabia. ISIS has made it very clear that whilst Al-Qaeda may well have stated that Saudi Arabia and the House of Saud is a dynasty that needs to come down, ISIS wish to make it very clear that they are intent on bringing it down and creating the discord and the polarization within it. So I think there's a number of different local realities, as well as the broader things that you mentioned, that actually we're looking at. You know, we saw an attempt at a suicide bombing in Indonesia today at a police station. We saw the hundreds killed in Baghdad, and we saw the horrific events across Turkey, Bangladesh. We're looking at a change of tactics, or an emphasis, if you like, on attacks outside of their territory.
And we will talk about those other attacks as well. And I just need to be clear that ISIL has not claimed responsibility, although this clearly has the hallmarks of ISIL. Rashad, you've lived in Medina. What must the people there be feeling and thinking right now?
I think it'll be utter shock. I mean, these are very closed societies, so the understanding of matters in the outside world is also very restricted. On top of that, it's a mellow society, one that is very apolitical, and in its religious content is actually very, it's difficult to describe because people assume it to be strongly Salafist or Wahhabi, but actually it's a very mellow religious community. And so this will really strike in a way that will create a shock in them, and actually a reaction that I think, not just questioning what is happening, but questioning what role the authorities are doing in clamping down on this type of narrative and extremism.
And that absolutely is the question. Saudi Arabia has had a lot of experience dealing with Al-Qaeda. Should they have more of an upper hand on this? Where do things stand with security?
Well, I think as a state, it's very security driven. So as was mentioned already, it's one which the security apparatus strongly clamps down on all types of communication. It's not a state which has open, you don't have, as an example, open protests happening in any of the cities. So this is actually, from that perspective, that it's very difficult to stop an attack like this if an individual or individuals wish to do so. But the fact that you've had a number of coordinated attacks, I think, does actually shake the ability of a security state to maintain itself. I think the last time we've had significant attack in any of the holy sanctuaries was Juhayman and Utaybi, was essentially a uprising aimed at the same intent that Al-Qaeda had and ISIS had, which was to reassert a true moral religious authority in Saudi Arabia, i.e. the establishment of a caliphate or a truly Islamic state in Saudi Arabia. And that was the last time we had something like this. And we saw actually back then, the Saudi authorities themselves did not necessarily have the ability of handling that situation, nor did they have the culture, if you like, within their military and security apparatus to be able to go in and engage and deal with this. So it poses all sorts of security dilemmas that actually I think will challenge the security apparatus in Saudi Arabia in a way that it hasn't really done so in the past.
Rashad, the Russian deputy security chief has a pretty dire warning. He says that if Bashar al-Assad is toppled in Syria, and as he puts it, the extremists take over, that what is next on their agenda would be Saudi Arabia. Do you agree with that assessment?
I think we have to step back and really think about this. We're listening to the Russian authorities, which are essentially responsible for not just the mass bombing and slaughter of Syrians, which we've seen with weapons grade, which is just short of nuclear weapons being dropped in Syria. but also the targeting of the moderate opposition groups across Syria. I mean, Russia has been instrumental in wiping out the opposition groups which have been fighting against ISIS. And in fact, ISIS has been able to take territory in times when it's losing territory everywhere else, but take territory in parts of Syria precisely because the Russians have wiped out the opposition groups.
And it's
So I
actually
think
not actually not even clear what he means when he says extremists either.
Yeah, and this is the other thing. I mean, 90% of the bombings by the Russians has not been against ISIS at all or against Al-Qaeda operatives. It's actually been against the moderate opposition groups. So I think we should see this for what it is. If it was really the case that we wanted to deal with this problem, and I think there's three layers to this. The first is we're never going to deal with ISIS and the creation of terrorism, whether it's the form of Al-Qaeda or the form of ISIS and their offshoots and their recruits, without fundamentally tackling the situation in Syria, which means you can't bomb and blitz and kill 500,000 people, displace 11 million people, and create effectively a massive magnet for terrorism, and then believe that you're going to resolve this problem. It's not going to happen. The only way politically we're going to resolve this problem is firstly by dealing with the larger problem in Syria, which means getting rid of Bashar al-Assad. Secondly, we can then start thinking about the measures that were just mentioned that hold on a security level. We need to move away from just mere containment of ISIS to fundamentally eradicating ISIS, which can only be done once we've resolved the Syrian situation. And thirdly, I think there is the ideological aspect. The pull and the power of these ideas that ISIS and the ideological rendition of Islam, I think we need to really tackle that on the ideological level. If we don't do those three things, I don't think we're ever really going to tackle this.
Assessment, it seems that so many of the Iraqi people that were able to use their voices after this attack are very frustrated. They are blaming their government and a lack of leadership. Do you agree with that assessment, Rashad?
Yeah, I do agree with that. I think I would only add a broader thing again, that we need to see this in the broader context, that actually what's happening in Iraq is not acting independently. This is not happening in a vacuum. Essentially, it's the Iranian regime which is completely controlling that militarily and also politically. So what you're having is, on the ground, the Iranian regime is dictating both the manner in which the military tactics are engaged with and who is fighting where. So we find that the Shia militia that are there are adding another sectarian dimension to this. We've seen the torture, the killing, the brutal murder of people in Fallujah who are not affiliates and associates with ISIS. I mean, ISIS had maybe 600 to 1,000 individuals within that region, yet we saw the constant bombing of Fallujah for the last 6 months. For what purpose? Essentially, in order to achieve some type of revenge attack. This was the type of language that was being used by some of the extreme elements. And so when you look at it in that broader context again, that actually you have the Iranian regime which is propping up the Assad regime, directing attacks in Iraq that actually are fundamentally counterproductive. They are going to create much more people who are much more inclined towards supporting oppositional and militant oppositional groups. And that's actually why ISIS have been successful both with the tribal areas in the past, and actually why in Syria as well they've been successful, because they were the only show in town. They were the only people who were able to win and defend themselves in a situation where where Sunni tribes see themselves as being attacked on all sides.
And that will be the last word, gentlemen. Thank you all so much. Thanks to Rashad Ali, Riyad Khawaji, and Matthew Hinman. Appreciate your time. And thank you as well for watching.